The most terrifying sound in the world isn't a scream in the dark. It's not the screeching of car tires just before an impact, and it's not the flatline of a heart monitor. No, the absolute most terrifying sound in the world is the scratch of a heavy luxury pen against a stack of legal documents. Specifically, the sound of your own flesh and blood signing away your entire life, while you lie completely paralyzed in a hospital bed, screaming silently for him to stop. My name is Eleanor. I am 34 years old. Or at least, I was 34 the night the rain-slicked highway betrayed me, sending my Mercedes spiraling into a concrete median at 70 miles an hour. Before the crash, I was the living, breathing definition of self-made success. I owned a boutique commercial real estate firm in downtown Chicago. I wore tailored designer suits, drank overpriced espresso, and lived in a gorgeous $3 million penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. I was fiercely independent, ruthlessly organized, and completely in control of my own destiny. And my older brother, Liam? Liam was the exact opposite. He was the golden boy of our family, possessing a devastatingly charming smile and an absolute allergy to hard work. While I was pulling 80-hour work weeks to build my empire, Liam was bouncing between groundbreaking startup ideas that always inevitably failed. He was a professional parasite dressed in custom cashmere. For the last 10 years, I was his safety net. I paid off his gambling debts, covered the rent on his luxury apartment when his investors pulled out, and let him use my name to secure loans. I did it because he was my brother. Because my late mother, on her deathbed, had squeezed my hand and begged me to always look out for him. "He means well, Ellie," she had whispered. "He just needs a little guidance." I believed her. I believed he loved me. But the truth, the cold, horrifying reality of who my brother actually was, didn't reveal itself until the monitors in my intensive care room started rhythmically beeping around me. I don't know exactly how long I had been in the coma. Time doesn't exist in that dark, heavy void. When consciousness finally, agonizingly clawed its way back into my brain, I didn't wake up with a gasp like they show in the movies. It was a slow, suffocating realization. I could feel the harsh, sterile lights burning through my closed eyelids. I could feel the mechanical rhythm of a ventilator pushing cold air in and out of my lungs. I could smell bleach, iodine, and the faint, unmistakable scent of Liam's expensive Tom Ford cologne. I tried to open my eyes. Nothing happened. My body felt like it was encased in solid lead. I tried to twitch my finger, to turn my head, to make a single microscopic sound. Nothing. I was entirely locked in my own skull. Then I heard his voice. "So, what exactly are the long-term projections here, Doctor?" Liam asked. His voice didn't tremble. There was no grief in it. It sounded smooth, conversational, and chillingly professional. "As I explained to the neurological board, Mr. Vance, the massive trauma to her frontal lobe is severe." A deep, tired voice replied. The doctor. "She has been in a deep vegetative state for 6 weeks. Her brain activity is minimal. While miraculous recoveries do occasionally happen, the statistical probability of your sister ever waking up, let alone regaining cognitive function, is less than 2%. 6 weeks. I had been lying in this bed, dying, for a month and a half. Panic, hot and violent, flared in my chest. But the heart monitor didn't even skip a beat. The machines were doing everything for me. "I see," Liam sighed. It was a perfectly practiced, theatrical sigh of a grieving brother. "And the cost of keeping her in this private VIP wing?" "Your sister's premium insurance covered the first 30 days, the doctor explained gently. "But we are now billing her private estate directly. It is roughly $12,000 a day. We have state-run, long-term care facilities that are significantly more affordable if the money runs out," Liam interrupted smoothly. I heard the faint rustle of paper. "Doctor, as her legally appointed medical and financial proxy, It is my sole responsibility to protect her legacy. Eleanor was a brilliant businesswoman. She would absolutely despise seeing her hard-earned fortune drained by machines and hopeless medical bills. No, I screamed in the dark cage of my mind. No, I wouldn't. Liam, I'm here. I'm listening to you. We should begin the paperwork for the transfer, Liam continued, his tone turning brisk and decisive. There's a state-funded facility in South Side, St. Jude's long-term care. I've already spoken with their administrator. They can take her by the end of the week. It's bare bones, but... well, she won't know the difference anyway. St. Jude's. It was a notoriously underfunded, decrepit warehouse for the dying, a place where patients were left in soiled beds and forgotten by the world. I had once handled a real estate foreclosure near that facility. The smell of decay from the building had reached the street. Mr. Vance, I must advise you... The doctor hesitated, his voice thick with professional discomfort. St. Jude's does not have the specialized neurological equipment we have here. If she were to experience a sudden crisis, their response time... I understand the risks, doctor, Liam said coldly, but my sister is already gone. She's just a shell taking up a very expensive bed. Please prepare the transfer documents. I have a meeting with her investment bankers at noon to begin liquidating her remaining assets to cover these final medical expenses. Liquidating my assets. He wasn't just abandoning me to die in a filthy state-run hospice. He was stealing my empire. He was going to sell my company, my penthouses, my stocks, and pocket the millions while I slowly rotted away on a cheap mattress, unable to tell the nurses my own name. I heard a pen scratch against paper. The sound echoed in my ears like a death sentence. I am going to kill you, I thought. The panic suddenly vanished, replaced by an ice-cold, blinding rage that burned brighter than any medical machinery. If it takes every ounce of strength I have left in this broken body, I will wake up and I will destroy you. I lay completely motionless in the dark, listening to my brother's footsteps echo down the hospital hallway, and I began the agonizing, impossible war to open my eyes. It began with my left pinky finger. The battle for my body wasn't a heroic sprint. It was an excruciating, microscopic siege. For 3 days after Liam's icy decree, I focused every single mental resource I had, every ounce of my former corporate discipline, every burning ember of my newfound rage, on a single, repetitive command. Move, move, move. On the fourth morning, I felt it. A tiny electric twitch, like a nerve waking up after an eternity of sleep. I did it again. Twitch. I did it a third time, my mind screaming with exertion. It was the smallest movement imaginable, but to me, it was a thunderclap of hope. I was back. I was in here, and I was clawing my way out of this lead tomb. But I knew I couldn't celebrate. The most dangerous moment of my life was the exact moment my brain reconnected to my muscles. Liam had positioned himself perfectly. He had my apartment, my car, my stocks, my company, and he had me, stashed in the most vulnerable, decrepit corner of a state-funded hospice where no one bothered to check on the patients more than once a day. St. Jude's long-term care. He had placed me in a shared subterranean room. My roommate was an elderly man named Arthur, who was always semi-conscious and mostly silent, separated from me by a single thin curtain. Liam visited exactly once a week, every Tuesday at 2 p.m., just to maintain the facade of the grieving, devoted brother for the overextended nurses and social workers. Any change? Liam would ask, his voice dripping with theatrical sadness as he stood over my bed. Did her eyebrow twitch? Can you check her pupil response again? Please, just in case. I'm sorry, Mr. Vance, the tired nurse, Maria, would reply, barely looking up from her chart. Her condition is stable, but there is no detectable cognitive activity. It's best if you manage your expectations. Most patients in this state, they just fade away, slowly and peacefully. Thank you, Maria, Liam would sigh, pressing a hand to his forehead, his face twisted in a perfectly calibrated look of noble suffering. "I'll just spend a few minutes with her, if you don't mind." As soon as Maria's footsteps faded down the hall, the facade dropped. I would feel Liam's hand on my shoulder, not in a loving squeeze, but a possessive, aggressive grip. He would lean down, the scent of his expensive cologne and a hint of fine bourbon washing over me. "Still taking up expensive real estate, aren't we, Ellie?" he would whisper into my ear, his tone dropping from theatrical grief to a low, venomous chuckle. "I must say, I never pegged you for the type to retire early. You always loved a good challenge. So, what are you going to do now? Going to analyze your spreadsheets and give me a presentation on your recovery plan?" He would place his hand over my face, his fingers just millimeters from my eyes, mocking my inability to blink. "This is all you are now, sister mine. A statue, a silent monument to your own success, which I am quite happily enjoying, by the way. I had to sell your company to my rivals for pennies on the dollar to cover your bills, of course. And I must say, the penthouse looks much better with my art collection. But don't you worry, I'll keep you here in this beautiful state-funded resort until your 2% probability of survival hits 0. Because I'm good like that. I always look out for my family, just like Mom wanted." He thought I was completely gone. He thought his words were just echoing in an empty room. He had no idea. The hardest thing I have ever had to do was to lie there, feeling his touch, hearing his smug, arrogant insults, and not move a single muscle. Every fiber of my being wanted to sit up, grab him by the throat, and scream the truth into his face. But I knew that was exactly what he needed. The moment I showed any sign of recovery, the moment I opened my eyes or spoke his name, I would be a threat. A very wealthy, very powerful, and very furious threat to his entire new lifestyle. Liam wouldn't have celebrated my recovery. He would have initiated a new plan. He was my legal guardian. He controlled my medications, my facility transfers, my entire existence. If I woke up and threatened his stolen fortune, I would likely have a sudden, inexplicable medical crisis in my sleep, and St. Jude's wouldn't have the equipment or the interest to investigate. I had to play the long game. I spent those weeks in the shadows, slowly rebuilding my motor skills, invisible to everyone. At night, after Arthur's breathing turned rhythmic and the night nurses settled down at their station, I began my training. I worked my way from my pinky to my entire hand, then my arm, then my legs. I would spend hours lifting my limb a few inches off the mattress, feeling the muscles burn with agonizing weakness, before placing it down silently. I practiced turning my head. I practiced moving my jaw. The biggest breakthrough came 6 weeks into my stay at St. Jude's. Liam was out of town on a business trip to celebrate the sale of my company, with my money, of course, which meant I was free from his watchful eye for 2 whole weeks. I needed to know how deep the damage went. I needed to see a doctor who didn't work for St. Jude's, a doctor who didn't know Liam Vance, and a doctor who would treat me like a patient, not a corpse. I needed a miracle. And a miracle arrived in the form of a 26-year-old nurse named Sarah. Sarah was new, fresh out of nursing school, and had been assigned to the graveyard shift in my wing. She was the only person who didn't treat me like a piece of clinical furniture. She would talk to me as she changed my IV bags and checked my vitals. "I know it's lonely in here, Eleanor," she would say softly, wiping my face with a cool cloth at 3 a.m. "But I'm here. You have such a powerful presence, even when you're sleeping. I have this feeling about you, like you're just waiting for the right moment." I watched her through my closed eyelids, sensing her kindness. She was the only one I could trust. On a quiet, stormy night, I made my move. I was alone. Sarah was the only nurse on the floor. I waited until I heard her approach, the squeak of her shoes on the linoleum. When she leaned over to check my blood pressure, I didn't just twitch a finger. I reached out and grabbed her wrist. My grip was weak, trembling, and pathetic. But it was there. Sarah froze, her entire body tensing, a gasp of pure terror escaping her lips. She didn't scream. She just stared down at her wrist, then slowly looked up at my face. I opened my eyes. I had been practicing this in the dark. I didn't flutter them like a movie star. I opened them wide, staring directly into hers with an intense, burning clarity. "Eleanor," she whispered, her voice shaking, her hand going to her mouth. You're awake." "Sarah," I croaked. My voice was a raw, rattling rasp, unused for nearly 3 months. My throat felt like it was coated in glass. "Sarah, please, I need you to listen to me very carefully. My life depends on it. And my brother cannot know." It was the riskiest bet of my life, but looking into Sarah's terrified, compassion-filled eyes, I knew it was the only bet I had left. I had just found my first ally in the war to take back my life. Sarah didn't scream, but her medical clipboard clattered loudly against the cheap linoleum floor. She lunged forward, her hands hovering over me as if she wasn't sure whether to check my pulse or hit the emergency panic button on the wall. "Oh my God," she breathed, her eyes wide with shock. "Eleanor, I need to page the attending physician. I need to call your brother. This is a medical miracle. No," I croaked. The word tore at my throat like sandpaper, but I poured every ounce of authority I had ever commanded in my boardroom into that single syllable. I squeezed her wrist with the last fraction of my strength. "Sarah, listen to me. If you call the doctor, they will call Liam. And if Liam finds out I am awake, I will not survive the week." Sarah froze, her hand resting on the emergency call button. She looked into my eyes, searching for confusion or brain damage. But all she saw was the cold, lucid desperation of a woman fighting for her life. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, glancing nervously at the closed door of my room. "He's your brother. He comes here every Tuesday. He cries at the nurse's station." "He is waiting for me to die," I rasped, taking a shallow, agonizing breath. "He has full medical proxy. He is liquidating my company. If he knows I am cognitive, he will arrange for a complication, a mismanaged medication, a sudden cardiac event. Please, look at my chart. Look at the transfer orders." Sarah hesitated, then slowly picked up the heavy medical file resting at the end of my bed. I watched her eyes dart back and forth across the pages. I saw the exact moment the realization hit her. She saw the aggressive do not resuscitate, DNR order Liam had legally enforced just days ago. She saw his explicit instructions forbidding any life-saving neurological interventions. He signed a DNR, Sarah whispered, her face turning pale. "And he requested to move you to the palliative wing next month, the wing where they just keep people comfortable until the end. He wants my empire, Sarah, and he needs me dead to keep it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need your help. I cannot do this alone. I will pay you whatever you want. I will buy you a house. But right now, to the rest of the world, I have to remain a vegetable." For 10 agonizing seconds, the young nurse stared at me. Then, she reached up, clicked her pen, and deliberately closed my medical file. "I don't want a house, Eleanor," Sarah said firmly, her professional demeanor snapping into place. "I became a nurse to save lives. Tell me what you need." "A burner phone," I said immediately, "and a physical therapy resistance band. But you have to hide them." The next night, Sarah smuggled in a cheap, prepaid smartphone hidden at the bottom of a box of sterile gloves. Using it was the most humiliating and exhausting experience of my life. My fingers were so severely atrophied that merely swiping the screen felt like lifting a 100-pound weight. Sarah had to hold the phone to my ear while I dialed a number I had memorized years ago. I didn't call the police. I didn't call the bank. I called Victor Thorne. Victor was my private corporate attorney, a ruthless, silver-haired shark who operated out of an unmarked office in Manhattan. He was the man I used for hostile takeovers. He had zero connection to the family estate lawyers Liam was currently manipulating. When Victor answered, it was 2 a.m. "Thorne!" he barked into the receiver, sounding annoyed. "Victor!" I rasped, my voice weak but unmistakable. "It's Eleanor." There was a dead, heavy silence on the line. For a moment, I thought the call had dropped. "Eleanor?" Victor finally said, his voice dropping an octave, laced with absolute disbelief. "The hospital reported you were in an irreversible vegetative state. I have the medical declarations on my desk. Liam Vance has already initiated the probate process to assume total control of your assets." "Liam is a lying, thieving parasite," I breathed, resting my head back against the thin hospital pillow. "And I am wide awake. Tell me exactly what he has done." Over the next 20 minutes, Victor laid out the sheer, catastrophic scale of my brother's betrayal. It was worse than I had imagined. Liam hadn't just taken control, he had pillaged my life with the efficiency of a starving vulture. "He sold your primary penthouse in Chicago to a tech executive for $4 million. Victor read from his files, the rapid clicking of his keyboard echoing through the phone. "He auctioned off your shares in the commercial real estate firm, claiming you would want the company to survive without you. He's moved roughly $12 million into offshore trusts that he controls directly as your conservator. And Eleanor, he has petitioned the state court for a permanent guardian and conservator decree." "What does that mean?" I asked, though I already dreaded the answer. "It means," Victor said grimly, "that right now, he only has temporary emergency powers. But on the 14th of next month, he goes before a superior court judge. If the judge grants the permanent decree, Liam will have absolute, irrevocable power over your life. He can legally pull your feeding tube. He can authorize lethal palliative care. Once that hammer drops, you legally cease to exist as an independent human being. The 14th of next month. I had exactly 5 weeks to stop my brother from legally murdering me. "Can you file an injunction?" Sarah whispered from beside my bed, looking terrified. "Can you stop the court date?" "No," I said instantly, a cold, dark smile stretching across my face for the first time in months. "Victor, do not file anything. Do not let Liam know you and I have spoken. Let him think he has won. Eleanor, if he wins that permanent decree," Victor warned. "He won't," I interrupted, my voice finding a sharp, dangerous edge. "I don't just want to stop him, Victor. I want to destroy him. I want him under oath. I want him standing in front of a judge committing undeniable, documented felony perjury and financial fraud on the public record. You are going to build an iron-clad case against him in the shadows. Track every single stolen dollar." "And what are you going to do?" Victor asked, a hint of his trademark predatory amusement returning to his voice. "I am going to learn how to walk again," I replied, "and on the 14th, I am going to crash his victory party." For the next 5 weeks, I lived 2 entirely different lives in that sterile, fluorescent-lit room. By day, I was Eleanor Vance, the tragic, brain-dead heiress. I lay perfectly still while the daytime nurses checked my vitals, rotated my body to prevent bed sores, and adjusted my feeding tube. I kept my breathing shallow, my eyes half open and glassy, staring blankly at the acoustic ceiling tiles. I learned how to completely detach my mind from my physical body, ignoring the muscle cramps and the maddening itch of the hospital sheets. But by night, between the hours of 2 a.m. and 5 a.m., I became a phantom fighting a brutal, agonizing war against my own biology. With Sarah standing guard at the door, I worked. The physical toll of profound muscle atrophy is impossible to describe. Lifting my arm felt like dragging a boulder through wet cement. When Sarah first helped me sit up against the headboard, the room spun so violently I nearly vomited, and the pain in my dormant spine was blinding. I bit down on a rolled-up towel so hard my gums bled, just to keep myself from screaming out in agony. "You're doing incredible, Eleanor," Sarah would whisper, her hands bruising my shoulders as she supported my dead weight. "Just 5 more seconds. Hold it." We used cheap latex resistance bands Sarah had smuggled in her scrubs. I started by pulling against them with my fingers, then my wrists, then my arms. I visualized Liam's smug, handsome face every time I wanted to collapse. My hatred for him was a far better stimulant than any adrenaline the hospital could provide. I drank high-protein shakes Sarah bought with her own money, washing away the taste of the feeding tube liquid. The true test of my willpower came on the 3rd week of my secret rehabilitation. It was a Tuesday at 2 p.m. Liam's visiting hour. But this time, he didn't come alone. I heard the heavy, confident click of his designer shoes, followed by the sharp clack-clack of high heels. The scent of Tom Ford cologne mixed with an overpowering, sickeningly sweet floral perfume. "Here she is," Liam's voice echoed in the small room. He sounded bright, almost cheerful. "Just like I told you, completely peaceful." "Oh, wow," a high-pitched, breathy voice replied. "She looks so pale, Liam. Are you sure she can't hear us?" "Positive, Chloe," Liam chuckled softly, stepping into my field of vision. He was wearing a brand-new tailored Xenia suit. Beside him stood a stunning, vacuous blonde in her mid-20s, clutching a Chanel handbag that I recognized immediately. It was my Chanel handbag, a limited edition piece I had purchased in Paris 3 years ago. "The doctor said the lights are on, but nobody is home," Liam explained, wrapping his arm around Chloe's waist. He looked down at me with an expression of absolute terrifying apathy. It's a tragedy, but Eleanor was always a workaholic. She never stopped to enjoy the fruits of her labor. I think, in a way, she would be happy knowing that her success is finally providing for the family. "You are so strong, baby," Chloe cooed, kissing his cheek. She raised her left hand to brush a piece of lint off his lapel, and the fluorescent hospital lights caught the massive, flawless 4-carat emerald-cut diamond resting on her ring finger. My heart rate spiked so hard, the monitor beside me let out a sharp beep. "Shh, it's just a machine glitch," Liam said smoothly, silencing the alarm with a careless flick of his finger. He looked at the diamond, then back at my unblinking eyes. "Do you like it, Chloe? The jeweler said it was one of a kind. Paid in cash." "My cash?" I screamed internally, my fingernails digging invisibly into the palms of my hands under the blanket. He had proposed to a woman using money stolen from my liquidated company, while his fiancée paraded around my deathbed carrying my personal belongings. "It's perfect," Chloe sighed. "I just wish we could have the wedding in the Bahamas like we planned. But with the court date next week—" "Don't worry about the court date," Liam interrupted, his voice dripping with arrogant certainty. "The judge granting the permanent conservatorship is a mere formality. My lawyer says it will take 20 minutes. After the 14th, all the frozen assets will be fully released to my name. Then we can book the private jet to Nassau. Eleanor will be transferred to palliative care, and we can finally move on with our lives." He leaned down, his face inches from mine. "Goodbye, Ellie. I'll make sure they spell your name right on the bronze plaque." When they left the room, the scent of their expensive perfume lingered like poison gas. I didn't cry. Tears were a waste of hydration. Instead, I waited for the night shift. On November 13th, the eve of the court hearing, Sarah locked the door to my room. She pulled the curtains tight. "Okay," Sarah whispered, her hands shaking slightly. "Are you ready?" "Yes," I rasped, my voice finally sounding like my own again. I pushed the thin hospital blanket aside. My legs were painfully thin, but the muscle tone had returned just enough. Sarah grabbed my forearms. I took a deep, shuddering breath, gritted my teeth, and pushed off the mattress. Fire shot up my calves. My knees buckled violently, but Sarah held on. I locked my joints. I shifted my weight. I let go of her left arm, then her right. I stood completely unassisted in the middle of the dark hospital room. I looked down at the burner phone resting on the bedside table. I picked it up and hit the speed dial for Victor Thorne. He answered on the first ring. "The hearing is tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the Cook County Superior Court," Victor's gravelly voice stated. "I have the forensic accounting files. I have the forged proxy signatures. I have the offshore bank records. I have a private medical transport van waiting in the alley behind the hospital at 8 a.m. sharp. Are you sure you can do this, Eleanor?" I looked at my reflection in the dark window pane. I was wearing a cheap, faded hospital gown. My skin was pale and I had lost 15 pounds. But standing there, bathed in the dim moonlight, I didn't look like a victim. I looked like the Grim Reaper. "Victor," I said coldly, "tell the driver to keep the engine running. I have a court date to catch." Cook County Superior Court, Room 3B, was entirely devoid of warmth. The heavy oak paneling, the polished marble floors, and the drone of the air conditioning created an atmosphere of sterile, bureaucratic finality. It was exactly the kind of room where a person's life could be quietly erased with the stroke of a pen. At precisely 10:15 a.m., Judge Harrison, a stern, gray-haired man with a no-nonsense reputation, adjusted his reading glasses and looked down at the thick manila folder on his bench. "Case number 884-CV, in the matter of the permanent conservatorship and medical proxy of Eleanor Vance," the judge announced, his voice echoing in the nearly empty courtroom. Sitting at the petitioner's table was my brother. Liam wore a perfectly tailored navy Tom Ford suit, purchased undoubtedly with the funds he had drained from my offshore accounts. Next to him sat his high-priced estate lawyer, a slick, fast-talking man named Peterson. Sitting in the gallery directly behind Liam was his new fiancée, Chloe, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the supportive future sister-in-law to absolute perfection. "Your Honor," Peterson began, standing up and buttoning his jacket, "we are here today to formalize the permanent transfer of medical and financial guardianship to Mr. Liam Vance. As the submitted medical affidavits from St. Jude's long-term care clearly state, Eleanor Vance has been in an irreversible vegetative state for nearly 3 months following a catastrophic auto collision. She exhibits zero cognitive function and requires total mechanical life support." Judge Harrison flipped through the documents, his expression grim. "I see the affidavits, and I see the aggressive do not resuscitate orders requested by the petitioner." He looked directly at Liam. "Mr. Vance, taking permanent control of your sister's estate and authorizing the cessation of life-sustaining care is an incredibly heavy burden. Are you prepared to state for the record that you are acting solely in her best interests?" Liam stood up slowly. He gripped the edge of the table, lowering his head slightly. When he spoke, his voice cracked with Oscar-worthy emotion. "Your Honor, Eleanor wasn't just my sister. She was my best friend." Liam lied flawlessly, placing a hand over his heart. "Watching her trapped in that hospital bed, a prisoner in her own body, it is a nightmare I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. I've spent the last 3 months trying to manage her complex corporate affairs just to keep her legacy afloat. But the doctors have been clear. She is gone. I am only asking for the legal authority to let her pass peacefully and to protect the estate she worked so hard to build from being consumed by endless, futile medical debt." "And the financial disclosures?" the judge pressed. "You swear under penalty of perjury that you have not commingled her corporate funds with your personal accounts during your temporary conservatorship?" Liam didn't even blink. "I swear it, Your Honor. Every penny has been secured in trust." The absolute audacity of the lie hung in the cold air of the courtroom. Liam had just committed federal perjury on the public record. The trap was fully set. "Very well," Judge Harrison sighed, reaching for his heavy gold fountain pen. "Given the medical evidence and the testimony provided, I am prepared to sign the decree granting permanent—" Clack! The sound of the massive double oak doors at the back of the courtroom swinging open violently cut through the judge's sentence. Every head in the room snapped toward the entrance. Striding down the center aisle, looking like a predatory shark smelling blood in the water, was Victor Thorne. He wore a razor-sharp charcoal suit, carrying a thick black leather briefcase. He didn't look at Liam's lawyer. He didn't look at Liam. He marched straight toward the wooden railing that separated the gallery from the bench. "Excuse me, counselor." The bailiff stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. "This is a closed hearing. I am Victor Thorne, senior partner at Thorne & Associates," Victor announced, his voice booming with absolute terrifying authority. "I represent the estate and the person of Eleanor Vance, and I object to the signing of that decree on the grounds of gross, systemic fraud, grand larceny, and attempted premeditated murder." The courtroom erupted into stunned silence. Liam's face instantly drained of all color. He stared at Victor, his mouth slightly open, the charismatic facade cracking right down the middle. "Attempted murder? That is an outrageous accusation in my courtroom, Mr. Thorne," Judge Harrison barked, slamming his hand on the desk. "Where is your proof? And where is your standing to interrupt a finalized medical proxy hearing?" Victor didn't flinch. He slowly turned around and looked back toward the open double doors. "My standing, Your Honor," Victor said, a vicious, triumphant smile spreading across his face, "is sitting right outside." The heavy doors were pushed open entirely. Sarah, dressed in plain civilian clothes, slowly pushed a specialized high-backed medical wheelchair into the courtroom. And sitting in that chair was me. I was not wearing a faded hospital gown. Thanks to Victor's impeccable planning, I was wearing my signature black Armani power suit. The jacket hung loosely on my emaciated frame, and my skin was as pale as porcelain, but Sarah had meticulously applied my trademark dark red lipstick. I didn't look like a dying woman. I looked like a CEO arriving to aggressively fire her entire board of directors. When my wheelchair rolled past Chloe in the gallery, she let out a piercing, hysterical shriek, dropping her stolen Chanel bag on the floor. Liam physically recoiled. He stumbled backward, his legs hitting his chair, and collapsed into it. His eyes were bulging out of his skull, staring at me as if I were a literal demon rising from the depths of hell. The blood drained so quickly from his face, I thought he might actually pass out. "Eleanor," Liam whispered, the word barely making it past his lips. He was shaking. Visibly, violently shaking. Sarah parked my wheelchair directly next to Victor, positioning me so I was facing the judge, but I slowly turned my head. My neck muscles screamed in protest, but I forced them to obey. I locked my eyes directly onto my brother's terrified, sweating face. For 3 months, I had been a silent prisoner in a dark room. Now, the gag was off. I leaned forward in my chair. The microphone on the defense table picked up my voice, amplifying the cold, raspy, lethal whisper throughout the entire courtroom. "Hello, Liam," I said. "I heard you were trying to give away my company. I decided to attend the meeting." For a full 10 seconds, the courtroom was plunged into a suffocating, absolute silence. It was the kind of silence that precedes a massive structural collapse. Judge Harrison stared at me, his pen frozen in midair above the conservatorship decree. He looked from my hollowed, pale face to Liam's sweating, terror-stricken expression, and finally to Victor Thorne, who was standing beside my wheelchair with the casual, predatory grace of a man about to detonate a bomb. "Mr. Thorne," Judge Harrison finally spoke, his voice dangerously low. "If this is some kind of elaborate theatrical stunt—" "It is no stunt, Your Honor," Victor interrupted smoothly, unlatching his heavy black leather briefcase. The metallic click echoed loudly. "Allow me to formally introduce my client, Eleanor Vance. The woman your court was just told is in an irreversible, brain-dead vegetative state. As you can clearly see and hear, she is very much alive, entirely cognitive, and fully aware of her surroundings." Victor pulled a crisp, blue-stamped document from his briefcase and handed it to the bailiff, who passed it up to the bench. "This is a sworn medical affidavit, signed at 8:30 a.m. this morning by Dr. Aris Thorne, the chief of neurology at Northwestern Memorial," Victor stated, his voice ringing through the room. He conducted a comprehensive cognitive and psychiatric evaluation of Miss Vance in a private medical transport less than 2 hours ago. She scored in the 99th percentile. She is of entirely sound mind, Your Honor, which means the medical affidavits submitted by the petitioner, Mr. Liam Vance, are completely fraudulent. Next to Liam, his high-priced lawyer, Peterson, suddenly looked like he was going to vomit. Peterson scrambled to his feet, holding his hands up in a desperate gesture of surrender. Your Honor, please let the record show that my firm had absolutely no knowledge of this, Peterson stammered, stepping physically away from Liam. We relied solely on the medical documentation and verbal assurances provided by my client. If Mr. Vance has misrepresented the truth... Peterson didn't even finish the sentence. He began aggressively stuffing his legal pads into his briefcase. He was abandoning a sinking ship. Liam was completely exposed. He gripped the edge of the defense table, his knuckles turning white. Ellie, my God, he choked out, forcing a sickly, trembling smile onto his face. He took a step toward me. It's a miracle. You're awake. I can't believe it. I've been praying for this. Stop, I rasped. The single word cracked like a whip across the room. I leaned forward, my dark eyes locking onto his. Do not insult my intelligence, Liam, and do not insult the intelligence of this court. You weren't praying for a miracle. You were paying for a funeral. I turned my head slightly, looking up at the judge. My neck screamed in agony, but my voice remained perfectly steady. Your Honor, exactly 10 minutes ago, my brother swore under penalty of perjury that he was acting in my best interests. He swore he had not commingled my assets. He lied to you. I nodded to Victor. It was time for the financial execution. Victor pulled a massive stack of bound financial records from his briefcase and dropped them onto the table with a heavy, satisfying thud. Exhibit A, Your Honor, Victor said, his tone cold and clinical. Bank records proving that 3 weeks ago, Liam Vance forged my client's signature to sell her primary commercial real estate holdings for $12 million. Exhibit B, wire transfer logs showing that exact sum being moved into an offshore shell company in the Cayman Islands, of which Liam Vance is the sole beneficiary. Judge Harrison's face turned scarlet with fury. He was rapidly flipping through the pages Victor had provided. Perjury in his courtroom was a severe offense. Attempting to use his court to commit a multi-million-dollar heist was a personal insult. And Exhibit C, Victor continued, turning to look directly at Chloe, who was shrinking into the wooden bench in the gallery. Credit card statements from Miss Vance's platinum corporate account. 2 days ago, Liam Vance used it to purchase a customized 4-carat diamond engagement ring for his fiancée, totaling $95,000. He also used my client's funds to charter a private jet to Nassau, scheduled to depart at 4 p.m. today. No! Chloe shrieked, instantly pulling her hand back as if the diamond ring had suddenly caught fire. She looked at Liam with pure horror. Liam, you told me your startup finally paid off. You said you earned this. Shut up, Chloe, Liam snapped, his charming facade completely dissolving into an ugly, desperate snarl. He turned back to the judge, his hands raised in panic. Your Honor, this is all a misunderstanding. I was protecting the assets. The hospital bills were astronomical. The doctors told me she was never waking up. I had to secure the estate. By funneling it to the Cayman Islands and buying jewelry, Judge Harrison roared, his voice shaking the wood paneling. You stood in my courtroom, looked me in the eye, and asked for the legal authority to sign a do not resuscitate order for a woman who is currently sitting 10 feet away from you. The judge ripped Liam's original conservatorship petition in half and threw it onto the floor. Petition denied, the judge barked, his eyes blazing with absolute contempt. All temporary emergency powers granted to Liam Vance are hereby revoked immediately. Mr. Thorne, I assume you have already contacted the authorities? The FBI's white-collar crime division is waiting in the hallway, Your Honor, Victor replied with a shark-like grin. Wire fraud, forging a medical proxy, and grand larceny. Liam stumbled backward, hitting the wooden railing. He looked like a trapped animal. He looked at the heavy double doors, then back at me. There was no escape. His entire reality, the millions he thought he had stolen, the luxury life he had meticulously planned over my dying body, had just been evaporated in less than 15 minutes. I looked at my brother, taking a deep, slow breath of the sterile courtroom air. It was the sweetest breath I had taken in months. "You always were terrible at math, Liam," I whispered, my voice echoing in the dead silence of the room. "You calculated the value of my company, my penthouses, and my cars, but you forgot to calculate the one thing that actually mattered." Liam stared at me, his chest heaving, sweat dripping down his pale face. "What?" he breathed. "You forgot," I said, a cold, triumphant smile spreading across my face. "To make sure I was actually dead." It has been exactly 18 months since the heavy oak doors of courtroom 3B closed behind my brother for the very last time. I am currently sitting at my custom mahogany desk on the top floor of my newly reacquired commercial real estate firm in downtown Chicago. The view of Lake Michigan is just as breathtaking as I remembered it. My physical recovery was grueling. Months of intense, agonizing physical therapy to rebuild my atrophied muscles. But today, I walked into my office wearing 4-inch Louboutin heels, completely unassisted. The immediate aftermath of the court hearing was a spectacle I will cherish for the rest of my life. When Judge Harrison revoked the conservatorship, Victor didn't even have to call the police. He had already tipped off the FBI's white-collar crime division. 2 federal agents were waiting in the marble hallway. As Liam was escorted out of the courtroom, completely numb and hyperventilating, they placed him in handcuffs in front of a dozen witnesses. His high-priced lawyer, Peterson, immediately distanced himself, leaving Liam to face the federal government entirely alone with a public defender. Because Liam had crossed state lines to set up his offshore shell companies, and because he had forged medical documents to authorize the termination of my life support, the charges were absolutely devastating. Wire fraud, grand larceny, identity theft, and criminal endangerment. To avoid a 30-year sentence, Liam took a brutal plea deal. My former golden boy brother was sentenced to 14 years in a federal penitentiary. There is no custom cashmere in federal prison. There are no expensive colognes or luxury apartments. From what Victor's investigators tell me, Liam is currently working in the prison laundry facility, earning 23 cents an hour. And Chloe, the devoted, grieving fiancée, she didn't even make it out of the courthouse with her one-of-a-kind diamond ring. Victor had already filed an emergency injunction. As Chloe sprinted toward the parking garage, sobbing hysterically, 2 police officers stopped her and confiscated the 4-carat ring, the Chanel bag, and the keys to the luxury SUV Liam had bought her, citing them as stolen property purchased with embezzled funds. She went from planning a lavish wedding in the Bahamas to taking the public bus back to her shared apartment in less than an hour. She blocked Liam's phone number the very next day. I, on the other hand, spent the next few months meticulously untangling the financial mess Liam had made. Victor and I successfully recovered every single stolen dollar from the Cayman accounts. My company's stock took a slight hit during the drama, but once the market realized I was back from the dead and more ruthless than ever, our valuation skyrocketed by 30%. But I didn't just focus on revenge, I also focused on the debts I actually wanted to pay. Sarah, the young, terrified night shift nurse who risked her career to smuggle me a burner phone and a resistance band, no longer works the graveyard shift at St. Jude's long-term care. When I finally moved back into my penthouse, I invited Sarah over for dinner. I handed her a thick manila envelope. Inside was a document proving that the mortgage on her mother's house had been paid off in full. Beneath that was a letter of acceptance to the most prestigious medical school in the state, fully funded by a private trust I had established in her name. She had always wanted to be a doctor, not just a nurse, but couldn't afford the astronomical tuition. Now, she won't have to pay a single cent. People often say that blood is thicker than water. They use it as an excuse to tolerate toxic, parasitic family members. believing that shared DNA is a free pass for betrayal. But lying in that dark hospital room, listening to the machines keep me alive while my own brother planned my funeral, I learned the hardest lesson of my life. Blood doesn't mean loyalty, and the people who truly love you are the ones who help you stand back up when the rest of the world has already dug your grave.